My name is Sarah, and from the moment I could form memories, I learned a bitter truth: love in my family was never distributed equally. My older brother Daniel was the golden child, the one who effortlessly captured my parents' admiration. He wasn't just praised, he was celebrated for everything he did, or didn't do. Me? I was the shadow that lingered behind him, noticed only when someone needed a comparison to make him shine even brighter. The first time it truly hit me was during Christmas when I was 7 years old. I remember sitting on the floor, cross-legged, as Daniel tore open the biggest box under the tree. His scream of joy filled the room when he saw the newest gaming console inside. My parents beamed with pride, and my mom even pulled out her phone to record the moment, as if it were some monumental achievement. I sat quietly, clutching my knees, trying not to let my hopes rise too high. When it was finally my turn, I unwrapped a gray t-shirt from a clearance rack, still tagged with $3.99 and the logo of some plumbing company. It was too big, too ugly, and way too obvious that no one had bothered to choose it for me. "Sweetie," my mom said with a faint smile, "you should learn to be content. Daniel's older, he needs more important things." I forced a smile, but inside, something crumbled. I retreated to the corner, watching Daniel play his new game, the screen's glow lighting up his thrilled face while I blinked back tears that stung like needles in my eyes. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't cry anymore. But promises like that are hard to keep when the same pattern repeats year after year. Birthdays were no better. For Daniel's 16th, they threw a lavish outdoor party at a lakeside park. There was a live band, gourmet catering, and a brand new Ford with a giant red bow on the hood. Practically the entire neighborhood showed up. Meanwhile, for my birthdays, I got to invite 2 friends over for frozen pizza in our dimly lit living room. My gift? A cheap notebook and a ballpoint pen, the kind people hand out for free at job fairs. "You're practical," my dad said with a shrug. "You don't need anything fancy." But Daniel always got the fancy things, even though he never had to ask. By the time I graduated college, the cracks in my heart had widened into chasms. While Daniel was welcomed home with cheers, confetti poppers, and a 3-tiered cake, I walked into our small dining room where only my parents sat alongside a takeout box of fast food. They handed me a plain white envelope. For a fleeting moment, I hoped it might contain a small check to help cover my remaining tuition debt. Instead, inside was a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. "For fun," my mom chirped, as if it were the cutest little joke. I looked up at them, searching their faces for any sign of guilt or awkwardness. There was none. My dad shrugged. "You know how it is, all our money went into Daniel's house." I smiled, a tired, hollow smile. I folded the ticket, tucked it into the pocket of my worn coat, and nodded. But inside, I wasn't angry. I was empty. Turns out, I was never part of the real plan in my family. And now, I was beginning to understand that if I wanted a place in this world, I'd have to make it myself, without expecting anyone to hand it to me. That night, after the silent dinner, I packed everything I owned into an old suitcase. Some clothes, a beat-up laptop, and the chipped red suitcase that had been mine since childhood. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. Fear because I had no idea what lay ahead, and freedom because for the first time, I was leaving behind the cold silence of my parents' home, the place where I had never truly felt welcome. The first few weeks in Cincinnati were a blur of exhaustion and discovery. My tiny studio apartment on the 5th floor of an old brick building wasn't glamorous, far from it. The walls were cracked, the pipes groaned like they were holding on to their last breath, and the faint smell of mildew lingered no matter how many candles I burned. But for the first time in my life, this place felt mine. No one could walk through that door expecting me to clean up after them or compare me to someone else. It was small, messy, and imperfect, but it was freedom. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise to catch the bus to my marketing job at a small billboard company downtown. The work wasn't exciting, but it paid the bills. By late afternoon, I traded my blazer for an apron and headed to the bakery near the market. There, I spent hours wiping down tables, serving customers who barely glanced at me, and taking out trash bags heavy enough to make my arms ache. Nights stretched long, and by the time I collapsed into bed, my hands smelled like flour and fryer grease, but something about those days felt lighter than anything I'd experienced back home. Back there, I had been invisible. Here, even though I was still largely unnoticed, I wasn't weighed down by constant comparisons to Daniel. But despite the newfound independence, the nights were harder. After the hum of the city quieted and the orange glow of streetlights seeped through my thin curtains, I would sit on the edge of my bed staring at the drawer where I kept that $2 lottery ticket. It sat there, buried under a pile of loose change, a dried-out pen, and an overdue electric bill, a bitter reminder of how little my parents thought I was worth. Sometimes, I'd pick it up and run my fingers over the silver coating, tracing the numbers underneath without scratching them off. To me, it wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof that in their eyes, I was nothing more than a vague chance, not someone deserving of real investment. Then one Friday evening, everything changed, or rather, began to shift. One of my coworkers at the billboard company invited everyone to a small party at her apartment. I hesitated before agreeing to go. Social gatherings weren't my thing, I preferred solitude, but something inside me whispered, maybe tonight will be different. The apartment was warm and lively, filled with laughter and the scent of baked goods. I found myself lingering near the dessert table, quietly observing the crowd when Marissa approached me. She worked in the creative department, and though we'd exchanged polite nods in the office hallway, we'd never really talked. That night, however, she smiled warmly and asked, "Sarah, right? How come I never hear you talk about your family?" Her question caught me off guard. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to say. Then, as if a dam had broken inside me, words spilled out, words I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for so long. Maybe because they never really saw me as part of it, I admitted softly, surprised by the honesty in my own voice. Marissa didn't offer platitudes or try to fix things with empty reassurances. Instead, she simply nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get that," she said. "Sometimes people see only what they want to see." For the first time in my life, I felt truly heard, not judged, not dismissed, but understood. That conversation stayed with me long after the party ended, echoing in my mind like a melody I couldn't shake. That night, unable to sleep, I opened the drawer again. The ticket lay there, its edges slightly crumpled from being handled too often. I stared at it, feeling a strange mix of anger and resolve. Was I really going to let this piece of paper define my worth forever? Or could I take control, even if it meant confronting the truth head-on? With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and searched for the Ohio Lottery website. My heart pounded as I uncapped a pen and gently scratched away the silver layer. Each number revealed itself slowly, and I repeated them under my breath, afraid I might misread them. When the final digit appeared, I blinked, then checked again. And again. My chest tightened, and I had to press a hand against it to steady myself. The screen on my phone confirmed what I couldn't quite believe, $134 million. Shock rippled through me like electricity. I dropped the pen and stared at the ticket, half expecting it to burst into flames in front of me. This wasn't real, it couldn't be. Yet there it was, undeniable and irrevocable. I didn't scream or jump around like people do in movies. Instead, I sat there, frozen, my mind spinning with questions. What now? Who could I trust? Would anyone ever look at me the same way again? By sunrise, I knew one thing for certain, nothing would ever be the same. The days following my lottery win felt like stepping into an entirely new world, one where I had the power to rewrite my story. But with great power comes great responsibility, or so they say. I knew I couldn't just throw money around recklessly. I needed guidance, a plan, something solid to anchor me in this overwhelming reality. That's when Carol Whitman entered my life, a woman whose calm demeanor and sharp mind felt like a lifeline in a stormy sea. I remember walking into her office on the 19th floor of a sleek glass building downtown. The air smelled faintly of peppermint tea, and soft jazz played in the background. Carol greeted me with a firm handshake, her bright brown eyes studying me as though she'd already seen hundreds of stories like mine before. "This isn't something that happens every day," she said after I spilled out everything in one breath, my history, my fears, my hopes. "But it's not magic either. We're going to turn this into a long-term opportunity, not a one-time stroke of luck." For 3 hours, we mapped out a detailed strategy. First, I wouldn't claim the prize under my real name. Instead, we'd set up a limited liability company, LLC, to receive the funds, ensuring my identity stayed completely private. Carol called in a tax attorney and an investment specialist, and together, they worked seamlessly, like gears turning in perfect harmony. By the time all the paperwork was submitted and processed, I received my first check, $85 million after taxes, transferred into a new account under the company's name. Holding that number in my hands, something that once existed only in dreams, felt surreal. For years, I had eaten instant noodles for weeks on end just to keep the lights on. Now, I could buy the entire building I lived in if I wanted to. But I didn't. Instead, I started small, paying off my student loans and clearing all my credit card balances. Then, I moved out of my tiny studio apartment and into a modest house in the suburbs, surrounded by maple trees that turned brilliant shades of red each fall. No mansion, no sports car, I bought a gray hybrid Lexus, sleek and classy but low profile enough to blend in. I kept my daytime marketing job for a few more weeks, not because I needed the money but because I needed time to adjust to this new version of myself. A Sarah who wasn't constantly backed into a corner. The only job I quit immediately was the evening shift at the bakery. Before leaving, I wrote a heartfelt thank you letter to the owner, along with a small check to help expand their cake display. It was the kindest goodbye I'd ever written. What surprised me most during those early months wasn't the freedom, it was the peace. Every morning, I brewed coffee in my sunlit kitchen, watching sparrows chirp outside my window. I sat down with a book, no longer worrying about payment deadlines or my mom's passive-aggressive calls. That lottery ticket now hung framed on my desk, not as a brag but as a reminder that sometimes, the only thing we need is a chance, even if it comes from the most unexpected place. But peace, I soon learned, can be fragile. Rumors have a way of slipping through cracks, no matter how tightly you seal them. It all started with Chloe, a college classmate who once shared a dorm room with mine. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Sarah, did you just buy a house in Edgewood? I swear I saw your photo in the neighborhood group and freaked out." My heart nearly stopped. In our neighborhood, residents often posted photos of standout newcomers. This time, it was my Tesla parked beside a mailbox labeled S. King, with the caption, "What does our new neighbor do to be this rich? Free Starbucks to whoever guesses right." Panic surged through me. I rushed to remove my name from the mailbox and re-registered everything under the LLC. But it was too late. Chloe didn't say anything else, but a week later, I saw 3 missed calls from my mom. I didn't call back. 2 days later, a text came from my cousin Lucas. "So you really moved to Edgewood? Everyone's talking. Your mom thinks you came into some money. They even asked if I knew anything." My heart sank. After years of being forgotten, it took just a photo of a car and a new house for them to suddenly remember I existed. I didn't reply to Lucas, but I knew the thing I'd feared most had finally happened. I couldn't stay hidden forever. Rumors spread like wildfire, and in my family, even a small breeze was enough to spark wild expectations. One morning, while watering the plants, I saw a familiar black SUV slowly drive past and stop in front of my gate. My heart thudded as the window rolled down, revealing Daniel behind the wheel, sitting next to my mom, her hair perfectly curled, eyes full of curiosity. She didn't bother to hide. I ducked behind a maple tree, my heart racing, as they stared at my house for what felt like eternity. Finally, Daniel turned to Mom and said something I couldn't hear, but I could guess. "It's probably her." The car drove off, but the dust from its tires lingered in my mind like a warning. That night, I sat in the living room, warm yellow light falling across the wooden floor, but I didn't feel comforted like usual. My phone buzzed, a message from Mom. "We need to talk. We'll come visit you soon." I locked the screen. No response. Her texts kept coming all week, alternating between gentle pleas, "Sweetheart, I just want to see you. I miss you," and casual guilt trips, "We're making your favorite stew this Sunday. Want to join for dinner?" And then there were the sugary sweet ones. "Family is forever, Sarah. No matter where you live or what you do, you'll always be part of us." I didn't reply to any of them, but I didn't block the number either. Part of me wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. Finally, after 2 weeks of silence, Daniel called me directly. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before picking up. "Sarah," he began, overly cheerful. "Listen, Mom's really upset. You've been avoiding us. Seriously, she cried all night yesterday." He paused, then shifted tone, getting to the real reason. "So, me and Haley, we're getting married. Did you hear? We're having the ceremony this coming spring. Mom and Dad are thrilled." I leaned back into the sofa, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Yeah, I heard. So why don't you come home for dinner this Sunday? The whole family will be there. Just come for fun. We're still family, right?" I stayed silent for a moment, then agreed. Part of me wanted to know what they really wanted. Another part wanted to remind myself why I had walked away in the first place. Sunday night, I drove to the old house, the one I used to believe would one day love me back if I just tried hard enough. Same white picket fence, same stone walkway, same old swing dangling under the porch. But I wasn't the girl who stood there waiting for praise anymore. Mom opened the door and hugged me, a little too tightly. "You're so skinny," she said, then walked straight to the kitchen without waiting for a reply. Dad gave a nod, like I was a guest. Daniel patted me hard on the back, like we were long-lost friends reunited after vacation. Dinner went exactly how I expected, conversation entirely about Daniel and Haley. Mom showed off the dress they'd picked, Dad talked about how they planned to decorate the backyard for the wedding. I just sat there, smiled faintly, picked at my food, and counted the minutes until the performance ended. As dessert arrived, Mom tapped her spoon gently against her glass. The soft clink rang out like a signal. "I have something to say," she began, eyes fixed on me. "Daniel and Haley are really excited for the wedding, but you know, putting together a proper ceremony and expanding the house so they can move in, it's going to cost quite a bit." I set my glass down, my hand steady. I was ready. And since you're doing so well, Mom continued, her voice sliding into sugar-coated sweetness, the family thought maybe if you could help, just a little. Around $100,000 to build a new garage and help with some wedding expenses. Dad nodded, as if it had already been settled. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smiling expectantly. Sarah, he said, family helps each other when it matters. Blood should be a given. I looked at them, all of them, my eyes no longer holding any hope, just a quiet calm, the kind I had fought so hard to earn. Family, I repeated, my voice steady. Where was family when I was in college? When I worked 2 jobs and lived off instant noodles for a month? Where were you then? No one answered. What was it Mom said to me back then? I tilted my head and looked at her. Oh, right. No one stopping you from working harder. Well, now I have, I said, standing up. I worked harder, but not to pay for the things you dismissed. No one smiled. No one argued. I picked up my purse and looked at them one last time. I used to hope you'd see me, I said. I used to hope to be part of this family. But not anymore. And if you really want to expand your garage, I turned to Daniel and smiled. No one stopping you from working harder. I walked out the door, feeling like an old creaky door in my heart had quietly, firmly closed. And this time, I didn't look back. The drive to the old house felt longer than I remembered. Every mile stretched like a rubber band pulling me back into a past I had worked so hard to escape. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, same rows of neatly trimmed lawns, same kids riding bikes on the sidewalk, but as I turned onto my street, a wave of unease washed over me. It wasn't just nostalgia or regret, it was the weight of knowing that this place no longer held any warmth for me. I parked in front of the white picket fence, staring at the house that once symbolized everything I thought I wanted: love, acceptance, belonging. Now, it looked smaller, almost fragile, like its paint was peeling away along with the illusions I'd carried for years. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up the stone path, each step echoing in my ears like a countdown to something inevitable. Mom opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt too tight, too forced. You're so skinny, she said, stepping back to look at me. Then, without waiting for a reply, she turned and headed straight for the kitchen. Dad gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable, while Daniel clapped me awkwardly on the shoulder, as if we were old friends catching up after years apart. Dinner unfolded exactly how I expected, conversation dominated by Daniel and Haley. Mom proudly showed off the wedding dress she'd helped them pick out, a monstrosity of lace and pearls that screamed excess. Dad chimed in with plans to remodel the backyard for the ceremony, detailing every flower arrangement and seating chart with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never doubted their importance in the universe. I sat quietly, picking at my food, forcing a faint smile whenever someone glanced my way. Each bite tasted hollow, like chewing on air. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, but none of it reached me. Instead, I counted the minutes until dessert arrived, knowing what would come next. Sure enough, as Mom placed slices of pie on the table, she tapped her spoon against her glass. The soft clink silenced everyone, drawing all eyes to her. She cleared her throat dramatically, her gaze locking onto mine. Sarah, she began, her voice dripping with sweetness, Daniel and Haley are so excited about the wedding, but you know, putting together a proper ceremony and expanding the house so they can move in, it's going to cost quite a bit. She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Beside her, Dad nodded solemnly, as though this speech had been rehearsed multiple times. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smiling expectantly, like he already knew the answer. And since you're doing so well, Mom continued, her tone shifting to something saccharine and manipulative, the family thought maybe if you could help, just a little. Around $100,000 to build a new garage and cover some wedding expenses. The room fell silent, heavy with anticipation. For a moment, I simply stared at her, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then, slowly, deliberately, I set my fork down. My hands were steady, my voice calm but firm. Family, I repeated, meeting her gaze head on. Where was family when I was in college? When I worked 2 jobs and lived off instant noodles for months? Where were any of you then? No one answered. Their faces froze mid-smile, caught off guard by my sudden defiance. Mom blinked rapidly, her lips parting as if searching for words. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. Even Daniel's confident grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of guilt, or maybe shame. What did you say to me back then? I tilted my head, addressing Mom directly. Oh, right. No one stopping you from working harder. Well, I continued, standing up, my chair scraping lightly against the floor, now I have. I worked harder, not to pay for the things you dismissed. I grabbed my purse, my movements deliberate and unhurried. Looking around the table one last time, I let my words land with precision. I used to hope you'd see me. I used to hope to be part of this family. But not anymore. And if you really want to expand your garage, I turned to Daniel, my voice laced with quiet resolve, no one's stopping you from working harder. Their silence followed me to the door. No protests, no pleas, just stunned disbelief etched onto their faces. As I closed the door behind me, it felt like slamming shut an old, creaky gate that had kept me trapped for far too long. Driving home, I rolled down the window, letting the cool night breeze wash over me. The road ahead stretched dark and empty, mirroring the clarity in my mind. I wasn't angry, not anymore. There was only relief, a profound sense of freedom that came from finally cutting ties with the people who had defined me for so long. When I got home, I dropped my keys on the counter and pulled out my phone. One by one, I muted the group chat notifications, locked the screen, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need their messages anymore. Not their judgment, not their guilt trips, not their hollow attempts at connection. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Life after that dinner felt like stepping into a new chapter, one where I no longer had to look over my shoulder or brace myself for the next blow. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's expectations, their dismissals, their comparisons. But now, I was free. Truly free. And with that freedom came a quiet joy I had never known before. I started living for myself in ways I never imagined possible. Each morning, I woke up early, brewed coffee in my sunlit kitchen, and sat on the porch watching the lavender sway gently in the breeze. The garden had become my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe deeply without judgment or interruption. I planted more lavender along the fence, its soft purple blooms filling the air with a calming scent. It reminded me of resilience, of how beauty could grow even in the harshest conditions. Writing became my passion again, or rather, it finally became something I allowed myself to pursue. For years, I had dreamed of writing children's stories, but those dreams were always dismissed as impractical. Now, I wrote not because I needed approval, but because it brought me joy. My characters were small but brave, flawed yet determined, mirrors of who I used to be and who I had become. Carol, my financial advisor turned confidant, helped me invest in a small independent publishing house. Together, we nurtured projects that celebrated creativity and imagination. One crisp autumn afternoon, I received an invitation to an art exhibition in Columbus. One of my short stories had been illustrated and selected for display in the New Voices section. I drove there alone, soft jazz playing on the radio, a light buzz of excitement humming in my chest. The gallery was bright and airy, filled with strangers admiring paintings, sculptures, and books. No one clapped when I entered, no one took pictures of me standing beside my work. But for the first time, that didn't matter. As I stood in front of the framed illustration of Little Moon, the story of a shy girl who learns to shine despite her fears, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. A little girl at the next table watched me curiously, then walked over. "Are you the one who wrote Little Moon?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. I nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, I am. I really love that story," she said earnestly. "You're a great writer." Her words warmed my heart in a way I had waited my whole life to feel. Not from my parents, not from Daniel, but from someone who saw value in what I created. After the exhibit, I treated myself to a quiet dinner at a cafe down the street. Sitting by the window, I jotted down ideas for new stories in my leather notebook. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars against the darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Weeks later, on a chilly Saturday afternoon, I found myself waiting in line at my favorite organic bakery downtown. The smell of fresh pastries filled the air, and I tapped my fingers lightly against the counter, humming a tune under my breath. Then, a voice behind me made me freeze. "Sarah?" I turned slowly, surprised to see Daniel standing there. He looked different, his hair a little messy, his shirt wrinkled, as if he'd rushed out of the house. His eyes, once so confident, now carried a trace of weariness. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, forcing a weak smile. "I live close by," I replied, keeping my tone polite but distant. He nodded, glancing around awkwardly. "Yeah, I'm just picking up some pastries for Haley. She's pregnant with our second." "That's nice," I said simply, unsure of what else to add. There was a long pause, the kind that stretches uncomfortably between two people who barely know each other anymore. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You know," he began, his voice quieter, almost hesitant, "sometimes I think this world just isn't fair." I tilted my head, studying him carefully. Gone was the arrogance of his youth, replaced by something softer, sadder. "I agree," I said calmly. "Life isn't fair. But I learned how to make it fair for myself." Daniel opened his mouth as if to argue, but then closed it again. Maybe he understood that I wasn't the same person who once sat quietly at the dinner table, swallowing insults and pretending everything was okay. The bakery employee called my name, handing me my order. I nodded in thanks, then turned back to Daniel. "I really do wish you the best," I said sincerely. "I mean that." And with that, I walked away, leaving him standing there. That evening, I sat on my porch, a mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands. The stars glittered above, scattered across the vast sky like tiny reminders of hope. The wind rustled through the lavender bushes, carrying with it the faint scent of peace. I thought about how far I had come, from the shadow in the background to the woman sitting here tonight, content and at peace. I once believed I was nothing more than a flawed version of Daniel, a disappointment to my family. But now, I knew the truth. I wasn't a copy of anyone. I was Sarah. Someone who had been overlooked, dismissed, but also someone who rose and rebuilt a life from the pieces. Is life unfair? Maybe. But I had made it fair with my own hands, my own belief. And the freedom I had now, no one could take that away. Under the soft glow of the stars, I smiled. Not because I had won the lottery, not because I had proven anyone wrong, but because I had found my worth.